The day Africa said no. Ibrahim Traoré AU speech shook the whole continent. For the first time in modern history, an African leader stood before the world and said, "No more." What Traoré just told the African Union has leaders scrambling and the West trembling. They tried to silence him, but Ibrahim Traoré's voice roared through the halls of the African Union, and what he said might change Africa forever. This wasn't just a speech. It was a declaration of independence from decades of foreign control. What happened at the AU summit will be remembered for generations. The day Africa said no. In one of the boldest and most powerful speeches ever delivered at the African Union summit, President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso shook the foundations of international politics. Traoré's message was clear: Africa will no longer bow to Western influence, neocolonial control, or economic manipulation. In this video, we break down Ibrahim Traoré's explosive AU speech, the reaction from African leaders, and how it signals a new dawn of African unity, sovereignty, and continental pride. What you'll see in this video. Full highlights from Ibrahim Traoré's AU speech. How African nations responded to his revolutionary stance. The moment the AU summit room fell silent. Reactions from international media and global powers. Why this speech is being called Africa's turning point, why it matters. Ibrahim Traoré is quickly becoming the face of a Pan-African revolution, inspiring millions across the African diaspora and calling out the systems that have held the continent back. This speech may go down in history as the moment Africa found its voice again. 1. Full highlights from Ibrahim Traoré's AU speech. Without a verified transcript of a specific AU summit speech, I'll outline the likely highlights of a Traoré speech based on his documented addresses, such as at the Russia-Africa Summit in July 2023 and the Alliance of Sahel States (AES) Summit in 2024, which align with his revolutionary rhetoric and anti-imperialist stance. Traoré likely condemned Western neocolonialism, accusing former colonial powers like France of perpetuating economic and political control over African nations. He may have criticized mechanisms like the CFA franc, which he has called a tool of slavery, and urged African leaders to reject foreign interference. Call for African unity and self-reliance. Emphasizing Pan-Africanism, Traoré probably advocated for a unified Africa free from external exploitation, echoing Thomas Sankara's vision. He might have highlighted the AES, comprising Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, as a model for regional sovereignty and cooperation, urging other AU members to prioritize African solutions for security and development. Food and economic sovereignty. Drawing from his Russia-Africa speech, Traoré likely stressed food self-sufficiency, criticizing African leaders for relying on foreign aid, e.g., Russian grain, instead of building local agricultural capacity. He may have called for industrialization and control of resources like gold mines, referencing Burkina Faso's nationalization efforts. Security and counterterrorism. Traoré might have addressed the Sahel's terrorism crisis, promoting the AES's joint force and rejecting Western counterinsurgency models like France's Operation Barkhane. He could have defended his use of volunteers for the defense of the homeland, VDPs, while dismissing accusations of human rights abuses as imperialist propaganda. Cultural revival. Traoré likely emphasized cultural pride, promoting national languages and traditional Burkinabe attire over Western influences, as seen in his policies banning French as the official language and Western dress for officials. Revolutionary rhetoric, closing with slogans like, "Homeland or death, we shall overcome." Inspired by Sankara and Cuban revolutionary phrases, Traoré would have rallied the audience, particularly youth, to resist external domination and embrace African dignity. The speech would have been delivered with Traoré's characteristic charisma, leveraging his youth, 37 years old, and military background to project strength and relatability, resonating with Africa's young population. Median age 19. 2. How African nations responded to his revolutionary stance. Traoré's anti-imperialist and pan-Africanist rhetoric has polarized African nations, with responses varying based on their geopolitical alignments, leadership styles, and public sentiment. Support from Sahel and like-minded states, Mali and Niger, as AES partners, Mali's Colonel Assimi Goïta and Niger's leadership likely endorsed Traoré's stance, given their shared withdrawal from ECOWAS and alignment with Russia. Goïta has praised the AES's joint counterterrorism efforts, which Traoré's speech would reinforce. South Africa. Figures like Julius Malema of the Economic Freedom Fighters have publicly supported Traoré, framing him as a symbol of Pan-African resistance. South Africa's G20 chairmanship in 2025 aligns with calls for reforming global financial systems, which Traoré's speech may have echoed. Youth and civil society. Across Africa, especially in West Africa, Traoré's message resonates with youth frustrated by poverty and perceived Western exploitation. His popularity was evident at Ghana's President John Mahama's inauguration in January 2025, where he received the loudest applause among 21 African leaders. Afrobarometer surveys show 66% of Burkinabe accept military rule, reflecting broader tolerance for his approach. Cautious or critical responses. ECOWAS members, nations like Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Nigeria, aligned with ECOWAS, likely view Traoré's rhetoric with skepticism due to Burkina Faso's exit from the bloc in January 2024. His accusations of ECOWAS being Western-influenced and his claims of Côte d'Ivoire harboring coup plotters strain relations. These countries may see his stance as destabilizing, risking further regional fragmentation to pro-Western states. Countries like Senegal or Kenya, with stronger Western ties, might criticize Traoré's alignment with Russia and rejection of democratic timelines. They may fear his rhetoric emboldens military coups, as seen in Mali and Niger. AU's official stance. The AU, while advocating for African representation, e.g., Security Council seats, is cautious about Traoré due to his junta status and Burkina Faso suspension post-2022 coup. His call for unity aligns with AU's Agenda 2063, but his rejection of ECOWAS and democratic norms complicates support. Public sentiment, social media, especially X, shows strong support from African youth, with posts calling Traoré a symbol of resistance. However, some voices, like Reddit user OK_wishbone_6664, criticize him as a wannabe revolutionary, whose policies risk destabilization, reflecting a divide between idealists and pragmatists. 3. The moment the AU summit room fell silent. The claim that the AU summit room fell silent during Traoré's speech appears in X posts titled, "The Day Africa Said No," suggesting a dramatic moment. Without a verified account, this may be an embellished narrative, but I'll hypothesize a plausible scenario based on Traoré's style and context. Likely trigger: the silence likely occurred when Traoré directly challenged African leaders for complicity with Western powers, echoing his Russia-Africa summit remark. "We African heads of state must stop acting like marionettes who dance each time the imperialists pull on our strings." A similar accusation at the AU, perhaps naming specific leaders or criticizing AU inaction on Western influence, could have stunned the room, given the AU's diplomatic norms. Context of tension: Traoré's youth and junta status contrast with older, civilian leaders, making his bold rhetoric, delivered in French with Sankara-esque slogans, jarring. His call to reject Western aid or reform global institutions, e.g., UN Security Council, might have caused unease among pro-Western leaders, leading to a moment of stunned silence. Symbolic weight: the silence would symbolize a confrontation between Africa's revolutionary past, Sankara, Lumumba, and its current establishment, highlighting generational and ideological divides. For supporters, it marks Traoré as a fearless truth-teller. For critics, it risks alienating allies needed for regional stability. This moment, while unverified, aligns with Traoré's media-savvy approach to capturing attention, amplified by social media narratives. 4. Reactions from international media and global powers. Traoré's revolutionary stance has elicited varied responses, reflecting global geopolitical fault lines. International media, Western media, outlets like The Economist and the Council on Foreign Relations portray Traoré as a tyrant or strongman, criticizing his authoritarianism, rejection of democracy, and alignment with Russia. They highlight increased violence, 6,389 deaths in 2024, and human rights abuses by VDPs, framing his reforms as populist but destabilizing. African and Global South media. Sources like Black Agenda Report and Africa Bulletin celebrate Traoré as a Pan-African hero, comparing him to Sankara and praising his expulsion of French troops and nationalization of gold mines. They frame his speech as a rallying cry for sovereignty, amplified by AI-generated social media content, e.g., fake videos of celebrities endorsing him. Neutral observers, BBC and The Conversation offer balanced views, noting Traoré's popularity among youth but warning of governance challenges. They acknowledge his resonance with anti-Western sentiment but highlight risks of isolation and insecurity. Global powers, United States, the U.S., via AFRICOM's General Michael Langley, accused Traoré of corruption, alleging gold revenues protect his junta. This sparked backlash among Pan-Africanists, who see it as an attempt to undermine his anti-Western stance. The U.S. fears losing influence in the Sahel to Russia. France, stung by Traoré's expulsion of its troops and ambassador in 2023, has called Burkina Faso ungrateful. President Macron's government views Traoré's alignment with Russia and rejection of the CFA franc as a direct challenge to French interests. Russia welcomes Traoré's overtures, evidenced by his attendance at the 2023 Russia-Africa Summit and Burkina Faso's reopening of the Russian embassy. Putin's grain shipments and potential Wagner Group ties bolster Traoré's regime, positioning Russia as a counterweight to the West. China and Turkey. Emerging partners like China and Turkey are expanding ties with Burkina Faso, with Turkey providing military support and China investing in infrastructure. They likely view Traoré's speech as aligning with their multipolar world agenda. Social media amplification. X posts exaggerate Traoré's impact, with titles like "Africa will not kneel," framing his speech as a global defiance of neocolonialism. These narratives, while popular, lack primary evidence and may inflate the speech's immediate impact. 5. Why this speech is being called Africa's turning point. The phrase Africa's turning point appears in X posts and aligns with Traoré's image as a revolutionary figure, but its attribution to a specific AU speech is unverified. The label likely stems from the broader context of his leadership and rhetoric. Symbol of generational shift. At 37, Traoré represents Africa's youth, challenging older leaders, average age 63, and resonating with a continent where 60% of the population is under 25. His Sankara-inspired rhetoric revives revolutionary ideals, positioning him as a catalyst for change. Rejection of neocolonialism. By expelling French forces, rejecting IMF/World Bank aid, and forming the AES, Traoré embodies resistance to Western dominance. His speech likely framed Africa as ready to assert sovereignty, inspiring movements in Mali, Niger, and beyond. Geopolitical realignment. The speech's call for partnerships with Russia, China, and Turkey reflects a multipolar shift, challenging US and French influence. This aligns with the AU's push for Security Council seats and financial reform, making Traoré a voice for systemic change. Cultural and economic revival. Traoré's emphasis on cultural pride and resource nationalization, e.g., gold mines, cotton processing, positions Africa as self-reliant, resonating with Agenda 2063's vision. His policies, like building a gold refinery, symbolize economic emancipation. Risks and critiques. Critics argue the turning point narrative overstates Traoré's impact, given Burkina Faso's worsening security, 20% increase in violent events since 2022, and authoritarian measures. Without democratic reforms, his legacy risks mirroring past revolutionary failures, like Jerry Rawlings' mixed record in Ghana. The turning point label reflects hope for a unified, sovereign Africa but is tempered by concerns over stability and governance, amplified by social media hype.